My name is Beth Ratway. I work for the American Institutes for Research. I'm a senior TA consultant there. Really, that means is I work with state departments of education on writing the standards that guide what you guys learn in the classroom. I taught this program for 15 years in Wisconsin. So I'm just really excited to talk to you all today. Sue, do you want to go next? You're muted.
Sorry, I'm Sue Leeson. I'm a senior justice on the Oregon Supreme Court, taught political theory and public law for a lot of years before that.
And I'm John Loach. I am the senior staff attorney for the South Carolina Association of Counties. We represent the state's 46 county governments.
Thank you. All right, we'd love to hear who you all are.
I'm Wayne Murdoch.
I'm Sydney Black.
I'm Grant Baxter.
I'm Diamina Mercer, and we're Unit 2 from Wyoming. Our mentors are Kim Ferguson and Michael Thomas.
Well, thank you. It's nice to meet you. We will read the question and then we'll be ready to go. Okay. Unit 2, question 1. What were the major disagreements among the 55 delegates during the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, and how were they resolved? What issues, if any, were not resolved, and what were the consequences? What changes, if any, should be made to the Constitution? You may begin.
Debates over slaves counting for representation caused Elbridge Gerry to remark, "Why should the blacks be in the rule of representation more than the cattle and horses of the North?" However, Governor Morse proposed a provision that taxation shall be in proportion to representation.
This placated the North enough to sign the 3/5 Compromise. Additionally, the Slave Trade Compromise, according to Article 1, Section 9, prevented the slave trade from being prohibited by the Congress prior to 1808, but a tax or duty may be imposed on such importation, not exceeding $10 for each person.
Furthermore, Luther Martin, a supporter of the New Jersey Plan, note if the states were to have votes in proportion to the numbers of people, the smaller states would be equally enslaved. Even so, Nathaniel Gorham pointed out, if among states composed partly of weak and partly of strong, the former most need the protection of law and government.
This is in accordance with the Virginia Plan. Eventually, Roger Sherman ended this debate when he urged the equality of votes for the state governments, which could not be preserved unless they were represented. While representation was solved at the convention by creating a bicameral legislature, the consequences to this arise in today's society.
Moreover, the American population has grown over the years, but the House has stayed the same at 435 members, as implemented by the Reapportionment Act of 1929. This means that smaller states like Wyoming are now being overrepresented in favor of this system.
If representation were to be reverted back to its original pattern, California would have nearly times the 80 number as Wyoming.
Concerning individual rights, Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 84 stated that the truth is, after all, that declamation we have heard, that the Constitution is itself, in every rational sense, and in every useful purpose, a Bill of Rights. An argument made in affirmation of this was that in listing individual rights, those rights could also be limited.
Brutus II stated, "It is not necessary that individuals should relinquish all their natural rights. Some are of such a nature that they cannot be surrendered, such as rights of conscience and the right of enjoying and defending life, etc."
Moving on, the powers of the courts were not specific and very broad. Article 3, Section 1 states, "The judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court, and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish." Additionally, Marbury v. Madison would establish judicial review in 1803.
Yet it can be argued that in leaving Article 3 so vague, the court could have more power over both the branches, which many people believe to be true. The Supreme Court asserted in Cooper v. Aaron, the basic principle that the judiciary is supreme to the exposition of the law of the land.
Thus, the Heritage Foundation argues that because judicial review is not outlined in the Constitution, that the Article 3 instead emphasizes the role of the courts in assisting the other branches in carrying into effect the authoritative acts of the government.
Furthermore, Article 5 established the amendment process and should be invoked to repeal the 17th Amendment. This amendment changed Article 1, Section 3, modifying how senators are selected, saying the Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state elected by the people thereof. Moreover, John Adams declared, "There never was a democracy yet that did not commit suicide."
Additionally, the Senate was designed to prevent this sort of mob rule. And since there was no re-election, senators focused on doing their jobs. George Washington said to Thomas Jefferson, "We pour our legislation into the senatorial saucer to cool it."
Consequently, the masses were supposed to be represented by the House and the state in the Senate, which is proven when Thomas Jefferson elucidates the placing the privileged classes together in one house and unprivileged in another would be better for both than a scission.
Conversely, James Madison once said, the truth was that all men having power ought to be distrusted to a certain degree. And in accordance with this belief, the single subject amendment should be reintroduced.
This amendment would be similar to Article 3, Section 24 of the Wyoming Constitution, which states no bill shall be passed containing more than one subject, which shall be clearly expressed in its title.
As Andrew Jackson once said, there are no necessary evils in government. Its evils exist only in its abuses.
Thank you. We are now ready to take your questions.
Thank you.
Thank you
John,
very
I think
much.
you're, yep.
Oh, thank you, Beth. So let me start by asking a fundamental question. Since the late 1980s, when the ratification of the Constitution was reaching its 200th anniversary, there's been a debate whether or not our Constitution is so encumbered with issues that it may be time for the states to convene a new constitutional convention. What is your opinion? Is it time for a new U.S. Constitution, and what changes would you make in the current form?
I don't think that it needs to necessarily be rewritten, but as stated in the preamble, it is there to create more perfect union. It's saying that it can always be improved, and that's why there is the Article 5 in there for the amendment process to make it better.
I would, if anything, if a new constitutional convention was to be established, I would like to introduce rules on the oversight of how much the government can view our technology through the National Security Administration, which I feel oversteps their boundaries and goes against our Fourth Amendment rights.
And many people in government, many people today do distrust the government. That's the biggest issue, which is why we should invoke Article 5, which, as we said in our essay, and introduce a single subject amendment so they can't slip free riders on their bill.
I'm going to ask a question based off of that then as well. So you talked about the amendment process as the opportunity to instead of having a constitutional convention or redoing the Constitution, that we have the amendment process built in. Is that the best way to make it better?
Can you rephrase
The amendment process, you talked about the amendment process as a way, as an opportunity to clarify and make the Constitution better and clearer. Do you think that that's the best way to do that?
I certainly do. I don't know if my colleagues would disagree, but however, I mean, if we look at it, I believe that the amendment process invokes so many checks and balances, considering like how it has to pass certain houses, and what is needed specifically in order to introduce a new amendment to the Constitution. So it makes sure that it's not a rash decision. However, it ensures that there is thorough thought put into an amendment.
Adding on to what my partner Grant said, we see this in the Senate that there's a line drawn down the middle. So we are equally represented by both Democrats and Republicans.
I would like to say that sometimes the amendment process can be a little bit bad, just because it can be very slow sometimes. For example, the 27th Amendment was originally proposed as one of the 20 to be added in the Bill of Rights. It was one of the 2 to be cut. So it took over 200 years for it to actually be.
The question asks about disagreements among the 55 delegates. If the question had been phrased instead about disagreements among the independent states, would your approach to answering the question have been the same or different, and why?
I think that it would have been fairly similar because one of the biggest disagreements was between the New Jersey and the Virginia plan.
I think it would have been a little bit different. I think we would have discussed trade a little bit more, because one issue was that different states had different currencies and certain states were blocking other states in trade. So we would have probably talked about trade.
We also would have talked about treaties with other states.
Yeah. Okay. How did the delegates at the convention vote? What was their methodology for vote counting?
Each state got one vote basically to ratify the Constitution, and 9 out of 30 states had to ratify it in order for it to be passed.
Well, I was talking about the convention itself. When those 55 people were congregated, how did they vote?
I believe it was mostly just they would talk amongst each other, and each people would have individual votes as well. But it just depended on what they were voting on.
Well, the fact is that they had to vote as state delegations. How did that affect the dynamics, or how would that affect the dynamics of the debates?
Well, it would affect by larger states and their delegates wanting to have the issues that would affect a larger state, such as Virginia, compared to like a representative from New Jersey would want smaller, would want things to pass that would benefit their smaller state.
John, go ahead.
Oh, I guess earlier in your prepared remarks, you made the point that the House of Representatives has been fixed at 435. Should the size of the House be increased, and should it increase according as the population of the as the nation increases?
Well, as we mentioned in our essay, if the Reapportionment Act of 1929 was repealed, then California would have 80 times the number of representatives in the House than Wyoming would, which proportionally seems fair, but it does decrease the voice that Wyoming has.
I think the United States was, if anything, founded on giving everybody a voice. And considering that we're a smaller state, we would just be unrepresented, our voices would just kind of left out of everything. And then so I don't think that should be changed in any way.
Well, to follow up on that, I'm from a small state too, so this is not a hostile question. Why should we be the tail wagging the dog?
You do bring up a good point. But I think at the end of the day that I think everybody should be represented as it is. It's worked so long. I mean, since the United States and the Constitution was founded, for us to change things now, I think can be devastating. And I don't want to be somebody that just stays in the past. But when the past works, it's important to understand and keep it the way it is.
Right now, there's so many debates whether we should make DC and Puerto Rico a state. And that would increase our numbers in the House of Representatives. And I agree with my colleague in saying that keeping it the same, like, why would you change the system when it's worked for over 200 years?
How about a quick question? How do they address commerce at the convention?
Could you repeat the question?
How do they address commerce as a discussion and as a topic during the convention?
Well, as I said earlier, commerce before the Constitutional Convention, each state had their own currency, so it could be a nightmare to trade with, not only among each other. Foreign nations did not really want to trade with us a lot because, you know, it's a nightmare to navigate. So they give Congress the power to mint money, which, I mean, pretty important power.
If anything, I think we could look at the EU for this example, considering that the European, or originally Europe was just a bunch of countries that were all separate currencies, etc. And by implementing the European Union, they were all able to trade under a single currency. Trade was easier to go about. And so if anything, with the United States becoming a founding state where everybody was to use the same trade regulations and use the same currency, it just made things so much easier for not only foreign countries, but trade within the United States.
And now with the Brexit deal and Great Britain wanting to fall out of the EU, they're saying that
We're at time, sorry.
Sorry.
So much. Unfortunately, we will have to skip the judges' feedback, but we want to thank you guys so much for presenting today.
Nice job. Thank you
Nice job.
so much.
Thank you.